So last session we designed one simple example to understand event binding. Event binding, how to handle the state and how we can manage two-way binding. These are the basic things we are learning. So event binding, in this yesterday we have to achieve one simple function here. Have you tried it by yourself? Or just depending on me to finish? Have you tried? Have you tried anything on this? Up to this you are able to design? Right? You need practical approach, right? Without practical, no use. Right? So you haven't tried these things? Then how? I will finish React and you will ask how to do this, how to do that after I finish. You need to up-to-date practice everything, so that I can give you some tasks. If you are not practicing basics, what I discussed in class, then how do I know your status learning? How I can give you tasks? Right? So practice all this so that I can give you some tasks, designs, you can work on them. So in this, actually two methods are there. What we have to do when user clicks on add to cart, this item must be added to the cart. And we need to update here. Two techniques we can follow here. One technique is actually in real world development, what happens is this entire page is not single component. I hope you observed the screen. We have navbar component separate. In that you have these categories. Am I right? We have main component separate. We have header component separate. And we have shopping cart component separate. That means generally what we do, we design separate components and we all keep them at one page. Just like we design Netflix page, header, main, the same. Here we follow that approach. But as of now, we are not designing multiple components. If we are designing multiple components, then we will face issue of loading component, updating data into component. Those all issues we will face. But we will see next level. As of now, there is no issue. Simple. What we can do is, when user clicks on add to cart, this item must be added into array. What is the array we created? Cart items. Into that array, we need to add that item. So how do we do that? Here, this is the button, handle add to cart. On the button click, we are searching for that item based on ID. After searching, we are collecting that ID product. We need to add this into cart items array. Into cart items array, we have to add this item. If it is an array, how do you add? Push. We will use push function. Into that, what we have to push the data. That means it is added into it. Because cart items is an array, into that we need to push. After that, after pushing, we have to update the count. To update the count, we have designed a separate method, get cart items count. We designed a separate method, get cart items count. This method should fire up. What it will do, it will get the cart items length. It will get the cart items length and it will update. Where we are displaying the length, we are displaying the length here. Right side, we are displaying the length. So what we need to do here now, simple. We have to push. After push, we have to use get items count. We have to get the cart items count. That means cart items count will be updated. And we can define the dependency. Dependency here is use effect. Use effect, that means it should load the component again whenever change happened in the length of cart items. That means one more item you added, it should update. In that case, what is the dependency of loading component? Use effect is loading component, na? Mounting the component, loading the component. What is the dependency for loading the component? Dependency for loading the component is cart items dot length. That means cart items length is the dependency for loading the component. That means it have to update the component every time whenever the change occurred in the cart items length. So once the dependency is defined, so now once you configured all this, where to display the cart items, that we will decide. First, you see here now, I am selecting any category. I can filter the categories here. Directly you can click add to cart, or you can filter the categories. I am filtering some jewelry. That means it should get jewelry related products. After the jewelry products are here, I click on add to cart, solid, and add to cart, item added to cart. It is pushed. And once it is pushed, it should update into the cart items. That means the count will be updated to 1. That means now you have 1 item in the cart. That means it's updated, right? Now I am using another all or any another option we selected. Suppose we are selecting another item. Suppose I click on add to cart, any other, suppose men's cotton jacket, add to cart, item added to cart, then it should update the cart count here to 2. So it will say 2 items are in the cart. Now we can display those items. If we want, we can display those items. Temporarily, we can display here itself. Later, we will show pop-ups and all we can display. That is nothing complicated. To display those items, you can write depending on your requirement. You can show, hide, or you can just display while adding. That depends. Suppose I want to add the items here. What we will do here in this, under this button, I will just generate a table. Right, in this, I will keep the class name as table and table hover. Actually, it is not great for table. Such width is not there. I'm just roughly defining. So what we need to do, we need to have a T head. In the T head, TR, in that TH. So we will say title, means which item added. And we will put price. Which item added the price. Another one, we will put the photo preview. The preview of that item, what is added into it. So I'm just giving this, then we will keep the T body. This body should repeat for every item in the cart items array. So what is the collection? Cart items. We have to map and we need to read every item and we need to generate a row for every item. In this row, let's keep the key. Key is item dot ID, right? In that first cell, we will display item dot title. In the second cell, we will display item dot price, and in the third cell, we will put the image src. It will be item dot image. So width is some 50 and height 50, like this I given. Actually, that area is not enough and good for table. Just roughly we are designing that here. Now this is the table it generates. The items in the cart, this, right? That means I am adding one more item into the cart. So add to cart, it is added into the cart. The cart items will update here. So it is going to update the cart items and display. You can see 3 items are in the cart. So we are managing a simple approach of handling interaction with the data. So here we are using simple data binding and event binding technique, fetching the data from API and managing it. We can do a lot of work. We will learn how to delete, how to edit, how to handle CRUD operations on the data. That we will see in the next examples, how to work with them. Initially, this is the basic example you need to understand. This example we will design in another style. So using a concept called routing and multiple components later level. As of now, we kept everything in one file. That means everything we designed in one component. What is that component? Shopping cart. Now, can you give me idea how I can delete any product? How to delete that product from the shopping cart? So that means I need one button here. I will do one thing. Just for the clarity sake, I will put the columns here. So here, yeah, I will put the aside as column 3 or 4. And here I will keep the column as 6. Okay. The style for every, this is style, yeah. For every card also, we will do one thing. For every card, we will give style. So we will keep the style. And height for every card, width for every card, I will give as some 200 pixel. 200 pixel, that's fine. This is how we design. I'm just adjusting the width of this content now. Now, what I have to do is, in this table, you see, in the table that we are generating here, this is the table we are generating. I am adding another cell, TD. I am keeping a button here. So button have a span. So class name BI and BI trash. And here I will put class name as BTN and BTN danger, right? And you can see this becomes a remove button. We are adding a delete button for every item here. Now on this button click, I need to delete it. Now tell me the logic. So you try this. This is your task. So some more work I will give, right? What you have to do is, so what you have to do here is, in the shopping cart, what is your task is, here I will copy this screenshot for you. Yeah, I will upload this on Classroom. I will upload this into Classroom. This design I will upload into Classroom, right? And what you have to do extra is, yeah. So what you have to do extra in this is, in this design, I will upload this design for you. Yeah. In this design extra, what you have to do is, at the bottom here, you have to implement this delete functionality. Understood? You need to implement the delete functionality. So it must delete specified record. Okay. It should delete the specified record. And one more, what I want you to do is put a remove button here. you put a remove button above and it should delete all records. Understood? That means it should delete all. We should put another option. It should delete all. This should delete all. And what I want here is I want total amount for the amount of these items that you added into cart. That means how much amount they have to pay. That means suppose some $250, 250. That is the total amount for these items in the cart. Understood? This is your task, right? You have to achieve this, right? And very important, remember, when I delete any item from the cart, it should update to 2. It should update to 1. Count should update cart items, right? And this bill also should update automatically when you add one product or remove the product. This is the work you have to do. This is your task, right? So I will upload this React task. Yeah, this is, I will upload into Classroom. You have to try this. You have to achieve this functionality. What do you say? Can you do it? Right? Try. So if you can try this, that's very good. That means now you achieved one functionality. So you achieved one functionality. And later we can add more functionality for this, more functionality, right? Technically, this is one option of understanding data binding and event binding. How data binding works and how event binding works, and how to manage the state. How you configure the state, how do you manage the state for application, that you have to define on this, right? So this is one example. I will upload the code up to now. This code I will upload into Classroom. This is shopping cart, and let me copy this code. Shopping component.js, right? Shopping component.js. Yesterday I uploaded, but here we added some more functionality today into this, right? You need to design this, how to work with this. I hope you are clear, right? In this, we discussed about 3 points. So what is two-way binding, data binding, right? Another one, how to bind the styles, how to bind the classes, how do we bind the events, how we can manage the events. Later in examples, we will discuss lot of events. We will see lot of events happening. Now, this is entirely we managed by using function components. We entirely managed in function components. Now the question is, how you manage this in class component? That means the state and event binding in class component. How to do it? Already I told you that in modern React, we prefer function components, but people who are already working on React with various projects, they have to work on class components because they know the class components as better than function components because of the version. But now I already told you that function components are better than class. But in function components, you learned how to define a state, how to define the events, how to configure two-way binding. How we have to manage this with class component. Let's see how we can manage the state, how we can configure the state in a class component. How to create a class component, already I told you. So what are the basic rules of designing class component? How it manages all these things, we will see. That means I am explaining the same concept in 2 scenarios. One with function, another one with class. That is for the people who want to know and work with class, and for the people who want to work with function. Which one is preferred in the modern React? Function, right? So now let's see how to use this kind of approach in function components and class component. In function component already, I do data binding. Right? So we designed two-way binding. In this two-way binding, we have register product. We are accessing the data. We are displaying the data. We are using the events. This we done using class, using function. Now the same we have to do by using class. Right now we will see what are the points about class and how it works. Right? Let's see. The first important option is, already I told you the details about how to create class component. You know the basic rules. How to create class component, actually already we know class component is derived from is a JavaScript class, is a JavaScript class that extends which class? React dot component, that implements React dot component. React dot component is the base. React component is the base. It implements and defines React component. Now, very important. So here, how do we configure the state? That means class component is configured with the implicit state. It is configured with implicit state, which is defined in React.component base, which is defined in React component base. What happens is, whenever you create a class component and implement this React component, automatically it is available with the state. So you don't need any special hook for managing state. Actually, in function component, there is no state. For managing state in function component, we are using a state hook. But in class component, state is implicitly available. If state is implicitly available, then you can directly use it. How? Let's see how we can configure the state and how to use the state, right? Let's see. And very important is, first we will see how do we define the state. Let's see the point. Let's create one component now. I will create a new file, two-way class demo, okay, .js. Two-way class demo.js, that is what we are configuring. So first, what we have to do, so we have to import, what we have to import? We have to import React, right? React from React. We have to import React from React. Then we have to export default class, JavaScript class name is two-way class demo. This is a class. Now how it becomes a React class. So component, it have to extends what it extends? React dot component. It extends React dot component. Now generally React component will have a constructor. React component will have a constructor. Already we learned about class rules, right? If you are, because we have to do a lot of things on initialization, that means actually the state is configured. This is important point. So state in React component, React class component is configured at the time of creating object for component. At the time of creating object for component. That means, so at the time of creating object means constructor, understood? Constructor is responsible for creating object. Constructor is responsible for creating object. That means at the time of creating object, the component is defined with state. That means you should know this point very well, that in class component, state is defined in constructor. Understood? Constructor, state is defined in constructor. In class component, the state is defined in constructor because the state is configured at the time of loading, at the time of creating the component. So the state is initialized. If state is initialized at the time of creating component, who is responsible for creating component? Constructor. Constructor is responsible for creating component. So the state is defined inside the constructor. And as per the JavaScript rules, if you are writing a constructor, in a derived class, then as per the JavaScript class rules, we know that the derived class constructor must have a super call. That rule already I explained, right? While working with inheritance. So I explained the rule of class that generally in other OOP languages, C++, Java, .NET languages, by default, implicitly, base class constructor will be called first, then followed by derived class. Base class constructor will be called first, then followed by derived class implicitly. But in JavaScript, it will not happen. That is the reason it is compulsory to call the base class constructor. So base class constructor, how you call in derived class? By using super. Already this point I explained. But very important, superclass constructor contains an argument. Superclass constructor contains an argument. Then the derived class, we have to pass that argument. And what is that argument? Argument is properties. We have to pass the properties. Just we have to pass the properties. Actually, the constructor of our class will have properties. These properties are passed into superclass. And what is the purpose of these properties? I will tell you. We will discuss. That is a separate concept. What is the purpose of properties? Actually, purpose of properties is very simple. Suppose later we will design that. Just I am showing the point. Already we learnt multiple components. That means, for example, what we are doing, we have index component. Now in this index component, we have to use another component. Suppose there is another component. So we have a component called, suppose you have a component called some login, or let's make it as some navbar. Okay. Now navbar component is having a drop down. And in this drop down, it will display all the categories, like electronics like that. That means there is a drop down. Inside this component. And what we have to do is, whenever you import this component in index component, what you have to do is, in index component, there is a list of categories. This list we have to send into navbar component. Understood the point? Navbar component is empty. It is expecting some list. Whenever you use that component in another component, you have to pass the list. Now, if I have to pass the list from index component to navbar component, this navbar component should have a list property which can accept that categories. Understood? That means every component will have properties. These properties are responsible for accepting data from another component. From another component, you send data. The data will be collected and it will be used by this component. How to transport data from one component to another? To transport data from one component to another, the target component which is receiving data, it must contain properties. Understood? That means every component have properties. In function component also we can have. I will tell you that, because properties concept separate. We will discuss separately. What is properties? Why we need properties? We will discuss. So whenever you are creating a component, every component may have properties. It's not necessary that every component should have properties. That means every component, actually, you have a div, we have a div, or you have an image. Image have a property called SRs. What is image? Image is a component. How this component will display image? How this component will display image? By using a property called SRs. That means SRC is a property which will accept the path and it will use that path image as source. That means every component can have properties. It's not necessary that every component must have properties. You cannot have a property for certain components. Components may not have properties. But if they have properties, it's important to pass the properties. So in this point, so we are designing a class and the class is implementing component. And this, if it is implementing, extending the component, as per the JavaScript rules, we need a constructor that calls the superclass constructor, and superclass constructor is expecting properties. We need to pass the properties from our constructor. These properties, forget about this. Later we will discuss. As of now, forget about the constructor also. We don't need that also. As of now, why we return the constructor? Because we want some state to configure. In that case, we need a constructor. Now, how to configure? What it should return? Already we learned that class component will not return anything directly. It will use a method. What is it? Render. This render method will return. This render method will return the markup. So it will return the markup. I will use the class name as container fluid. I'm using the class name as container fluid. That is how we configure. Now we are defining a component. So we are configuring a component and the component is returning some markup, and this is a class component. So I will just put here, as product details. Okay. Just I will define product details. Now how to configure a state for this? It have implicit state. If you have implicit state, you can access the state in the constructor by using this dot state. This dot state. This refers to the current class. That means if your class is extending React component, this React component have a state which you can access. That means it can extend that. That means now your class is also having that state. If your class is having the state, you can access directly by using this dot state. If you want to access the base class state, then what you do? We generally use super dot state. Understood? Super dot state is used to access the base class state. We don't want base class state. So we want the derived class state. That means we have to configure this dot state. And what is this state? Actually, you should know another point, that this is how it is constructed. That means state is defined in constructor, and state in class component. Class component is an object, is an JavaScript object, is an JavaScript object with the key and value collection. Is an JavaScript object with key and value collection. That means how do we define the state? In the constructor. In the constructor, it is expecting props. And inside the constructor, we are first calling super props, because as per the rules of JavaScript, we need to do it. Then I am configuring this dot state, and state is an object. State is an object. So in this object, you can have the key, and you can have value. Value can be any type. Value can be any type. It can be a number, it can be a string, it can be a boolean, right? It can be an array, it can be an array. You can have any type of value inside it. It can be again an object, it can be again an object, anything you can have inside it, anything you can configure inside it. So that means the data is stored and maintained in the state. So by using this technique, we can have multiple keys and values. So state in class component is an object. State in function component is an state in function component is what type? State in function component is what type? State in function component is what type? You use destructuring, na? You use destructuring means it is array type. I told you, na? It is array type. Array type, it have two options. One is getter, another one setter. It is an array type. That is why you are using array destructuring, right? In function component, why you are using array destructuring? Where is it? Yeah. In function component, why you are using array destructuring? You see, generally, when you configure the state, why you are using destructuring like this? Because it is an array. It is an array. It is an array. That is the reason you are destructuring it. It is an array. But here it is an object. It is an object. So usually object means it contains key and value. That means you have to define as an object. It contains key and value. For example, key. For example, C, I will remove this details here. So here I will give the key as title. Title is a key, and in that value I will give as product details. Product details. After that, comma, I have another property. Another property is nothing but, suppose I have name is a property and name is Samsung TV, like this. We have another property. What is it? Price. This is a number type. We have another property, that is stock. This is boolean type, true or false. We have another property, cities. So cities, it is an array. It is an array of string type. We have Delhi. So we have Hyderabad, like this. We have cities. And we have another property, rating. And it is again an object. It contains rate as 4.5. Again, it contains count as some 6,000. Like this, we define the state. That means now state contains lot of details. State contains lot of details. That means it contains title, the name, the price, the stock, cities, and there can be various types. Now what we have to do is we need to access the state and we have to use it here. So how do we access the state and use it here? So we have to access anything in a class. You have to access by using this dot state contains, you can see all these. I will access title. That means it should display the title. Let's put this component in the startup, two-way class demo in the startup. I will put that two-way class demo that is in the startup, and it is product details. That is the title. We are displaying the product title coming from state, and the product details we will create here, data list, data term, name, and this name comes from, so data definition, this name comes from this dot state dot name. Another data term, this is price, and data definition, it will come from this dot state dot price. We have to access that. So another is stock, and data definition, so we will access here. So this dot state dot stock, is equal to true, question mark we say available, colon we say out of stock, out of stock. Another data term is cities. And the data definition here, I will use an ordered list. I need to generate a list item, then we have to use this dot state dot, we have cities, it is an array, then we have to use a map, we have to access every city, and for every city we have to create a list item and print that city. Here we will put a key and we will print the city. And rating, we have to print the rating. So data term, another is rating. So here data definition, here we will put a span. So we will put a span, class name bi star fill. So and text success. So and here I will put here this dot state dot rating. Rating is the object dot rate. We have to define the rate. And in the square brace, I will put here this dot rating, this dot state dot rating. This is again curly brace. This dot state dot rating dot count. We will display the count. These are all details we need to display here. And these are all the details here. We have all the details. This time we are configuring the details in a class component. Now class component is configured with a state. We are storing the data in the state. We are accessing and using it. Now this is difference how you configure state in class, how you configure the state in function. In function you need separate hooks. Use state hook, you need to handle that. But here we can simply configure, because implicitly it is state, you can define and you can use it. That means in this state you can store the keys with any type of value, whether it is a string or a number or a date array or an object, any kind of data you can handle here, right? This is first example. This is general, how we can store the data in the state and how we can access and display. How two-way binding works. This is one way now. This is one-way binding. That means this is an example of one-way binding, how the one-way binding works. Now let's see how two-way works. That means now how to manage the events here. How do we configure the events? How do we manage the events? How two-way binding works in this. Let's see. For two-way binding, I will do one thing. In this state, I will just keep only one value. Simple example I will say. I will put username. A username is initially empty string. Username is empty string. So here I will just put a simple header. Yeah. I will clean up all this, and here I am defining a simple. So here this is username, right? So what we will do, we will put a heading user details. Just I will put a text box. Input type is equal to text. Type is equal to text. And in this, I want to display the username. Whatever username is typed, I have to update into the state. First, I need to get the username and display. I will just put a line break. Just put a line break here, BR, roughly. And what I will do here is, in a paragraph, I want to display some hello and the username. This dot state dot username. And by default, that username is some John. That means it is able to access that username and display. Now, same like in function component, how you learned, whatever the name entered, it should be updated here. So same two-way binding we want to manage. In that case, what we have to do here is we have to write an event. event for text box. Then what is the event we have to write? On change, on change. So the rule is same, but here it is a class. In a class, can we have function? I explained that rule, right? Already we discussed it. A class can contain only properties, methods, constructor, and accessors. So I given FAQs also. Can we have a function in a class? No. Can we call a function in class? Yes. We cannot have a function in class. Can you have a variable in class? No. So we can call variable inside method, define inside method, not directly in the class. Why? Why we cannot have function and variables in class? Because they are immutable. These all rules I told you. Second time I explained, you already learned in JavaScript, we discussed again. So what to do now? We have to just write a method. You know how to write a method in class. What is it? Handle user change. Am I right? This is simple method, no function, nothing. And there are no access modifiers also, public, private, nothing is there because it is JavaScript class. JavaScript class will not allow anything, just a simple method. What this have to do? It is expecting E target, okay? E is the event argument. Now comes very important point is when user is changing the value, I should display. Then in that case, here we have to write on change. On change is equal to, this is a class member. Class members we have to access with this. This dot, what is it? Handle change, handle user change. In a function component, because it is a function, we can direct this. Any member of the class within the class, if you want to access, you have to use this, right? So now you are configuring this, okay? Now what should happen on this change? This is another very important point. Actually, when you are using alert, I am using alert. In the alert, I will display E dot target dot, what is it? Value. I am using, or I will better put console log, okay? Console dot log E dot target dot value. We are collecting the value and first displaying. We will check whether it is working or not. And let's run this and see here. So refresh and let's inspect. And let's go here in the console. In the console, let's type something here. And I am typing, it is working fine. Same, just like how you defined in the function component, it is working. Currently, I am showing in the console log. In the console log, we are just displaying, right? We are configuring that. But very important is here, this we need to update into state. This we need to update into state. And if you want to store anything in the state, here one more point is to read the value configured in a state of class component. You have to refer the key, right? That means we have to access like this dot state dot the key name, right? How you access, we have to refer the key. And to write value, or you can say to set value, to set the value into state, you have to use the method. You have to use the method, this dot set state method. We have to use set state method. This setter and getter, so we are manually designing in function. In function, we are designing a setter by ourselves. Am I right? So, and we are designing a getter by ourselves. Here, state is a getter and the set state is a setter. That means directly, implicitly, it have a set state, which will set the value into it. That means we have implicit getters and setters. We will put implicitly getter and setters. That means here implicitly they have. That means what you have to do now. Here we need to define. So this dot, what is it? Set state. Set state, into that it is an object. State is an object. In that state object, what is the property? User name. Into that property, what is the value? E dot target dot value. This is what we need to update. Now one problem will come. Previously we don't have the problem. You haven't seen any error when I am using console log. When I am using console log, you haven't seen any error. Just remove this. I'm using console.log e.target.value. You can see that here there is no error here. When I am typing, there is no error. Everything is fine. But when you are trying to set into state, now the problem will come. What is the problem? The problem is simple. It says that I can't understand what is this handle user change. State says that I can't understand this handle user change. You are saying that set a value into state. But state says that I don't know your method, what you are trying. So you see here, now I am trying to enter here. It shows an error. And error is nothing but, it says that, so it is unable to set state. It cannot read properties of undefined. It is unable to set state. Now the question is, why state cannot understand the method? Without state, it is working fine. But once I start using the state in the event, state says that I can't do this. Why it is doing that? Because the point is very simple. When the state is created, the state is created at the time of creating the component, because you given in constructor, na? If you given in constructor, the state is created at the time of creating the component. When the event is mentioned, after creating the component, the event will fire up. Then how state knows this event? Understood? That means state cannot understand the event because event is not created at the time of loading the constructor. Means at the time of creating component, state doesn't know about the event. Later when you try to use the event for state, then state will ask, I don't know this event. Then I want the state to understand about this event and use this event. Then this event need to be registered at the time of creating the component. Understood? Right? That means why state is unable to use this event, because state is created at the time of creating component and event is created after the component created. Then obviously state cannot use the event. If state have to use event, the event must be at the time of creating state only. At the time of creating state. There is another technique we will learn, different techniques. But first point is why state is unable to understand this event. Remember, if you don't use this state, event will work fine. Because you are using event with some DOM manipulations. DOM manipulations will work, but state will not work for event. State will not work for event. This is another very important point. That means you cannot set state. So at any specified event in DOM. In DOM, at any specified event, you cannot set a state. So because as as a state is configured, as a state is configured at, state is configured at, technically state is configured at instantiation. Instantiation means creating an object at instantiation of which one? Component. Instantiation of component, and event is defined. Event is defined after instantiation. After instantiation, event is defined. State is defined at the time of instantiation. Event is defined at the time of loading the DOM. At the time of loading the DOM, the events are configured, because I told you that events belong to window object. Now event belongs to window browser object, right? Now what we have to do is, so here very important note, if your event is trying to use state, then your event must bind with the state. Understood? If event v is binded with state, then only event can use state. If event is not using state, then you can directly use the events like console log, like alerts, like document write. If event is not using state, then it's okay, it is working fine. But if event is trying to use state, then your event must bind with the state. How to bind the event with the state? At the time of creating, means in the constructor, we have to call this event, this dot handle user change. What it has to do is, this dot handle user change dot, we have a bind method, bind with this means current constructor. That means this event is binded with the current constructor. That means it is binded with the current state. If it is binded with the current state, now this event can use the state. Understood? That means event cannot use state until or unless it is binded with the state. And where you bind the state, we have to bind that at the time of instantiation. At the time of instant, there are other techniques also, we will see. But this is not at all required when you are dealing with the state in function component. We haven't done anything like this. In function component, directly we are using function. We are pointing towards the function. But in state, in specially class component, when you are configuring the state, it is very important to handle this. Now you can see this. That means what this means, you are binding this event with the current constructor. If you are binding with the current constructor, that means it can use the current state. So that means this event is using current state. So now it can use the current state. So here, now I am typing here. Now it is fine. There is no problem. If you miss this line, that means every event that you are writing, in a class component, if it is using state, it must be registered here. Compulsory. It must be registered here. There are other techniques also. Suppose I am not binding here. Then obviously problem will come. Obviously error will come. It says that I can't understand the state, because event is not binded with the state. Actually, here we can write like this. That means here I can use that bind method. I am using bind here. So you see now I am using bind there. I am typing, still problem. This must be binded. This is binded. Binded with which one? This. Actually, this is not required. Actually, you see now I am typing. It's working fine. That means you have to bind to the current constructor. Then only it will work. Now this becomes an issue later. Why? Because later if I want to pass some arguments, if I want to pass my custom arguments, currently we are using ID value by using target. If you want to pass custom arguments, then passing arguments into this, how you'll pass? How you will pass? Already it is using this, right? right? Passing arguments into this is always difficult now. If you're not allowing arguments, that's okay. You can configure this. That means you don't need to pass any arguments. You can bind like this. So that means there are two techniques of binding. That means you can bind here. There are so many other techniques I will tell you. So how you can event binding in the constructor. In the constructor, what you have to do in the constructor, you need to configure what is this? This dot handle change. Handle change is equal to this dot handle change. Handle change, and here we have to use bind, right? Bind with this. This is one technique, or you can use another technique. Another technique is in the input type is equal to text. In here we have to define on change is equal to, here we need to configure this dot handle change dot bind with what? This bind with this. You can configure in this way. You can use any. Actually, there are some other techniques we will see in the next concept, next point. Actually, when you configure the event, here we have to define a callback event. This should use this dot handle change. Handle change. That means it uses a callback function. That means on change have to use a callback function. But to handle this callback function, we will learn some other technique here. That means what it should do, it should use a callback function. That callback function should return this handle change. Callback function is returning handle change. That means it has to collect the value and update. Here event is not having problem, but how to collect the value? We have to send the arguments. Na? This is the function, right? Into the function, we need to define the arguments and we have to configure the arguments. But error is not there, right? How do we collect it? Later we will see. But as of now, we don't try this until or unless we learn that concept. Here you use only two techniques. One is bind in the constructor or bind here. What is this? This dot handle user change bind with this. You can configure this. That means whatever changes we are making, it will update here. Now you can try every example in the same way now. Means how do we configure the events and how do we bind the events? Suppose here I am using this dot just for your example. Handle change, this dot handle change dot bind with this. That's how we need to define. Right, no need. Just I am giving for example. I am just making this as comment because any one is enough. This to give you in notes, I am writing like this. You can give at any one location. This is example of class. Means how we can handle the two-way. I hope you can try now that form. Right, two-way binding. You can try the form that we designed. That means text box, drop down, and checkbox. So we designed a form. Same, what we have to do, we have to write handle change, handle name change, handle price change, handle stock change, handle city change. For every change, how to update the state? Same way. This dot set state, you have name, you have price, you have city, same how you done in function. But how many events you are writing? All those events should have a bind, or all those events together you can bind in the constructor. You can define in the constructor. That means you can try now this technique. So two-way binding, you can try this technique now. That means what you have to do is you have to create a state. State will have two objects. One is product, another one new product. New product, and you have to configure all these events. Design is same, only the event technique will change. That means instead of function, you have to use a class. Now the question here is, in the class component, how we can interact with the APIs, work with the APIs and manage them. Here also same fetch method. Same fetch method we can manage and we can handle. That means technically we can use the same fetch method for handling. Same fetch method you can do, but here you don't have use effect hook. Here you don't have use effect hook. If you want anything to happen at the time of loading the component, so what you do is, here you can just write another one that is a component did mount. Component did mount is the method. Component did mount is the method which indicates what actions to perform at the time of loading the component. Component initialization, it is same as use effect. It is same as use effect. That means what use effect is doing, this component did mount is also doing the similar thing, right? That we will see in next level, how to handle this, right? Working with APIs in class component, how to design the same shopping cart like example using class component, we will see. That we'll see in tomorrow session, right? This is enough. You try this first, right? If you can try, I given one exercise, you have to do that exercise and submit in the class, right? If you can do that, that's very good. I will give you some more exercises now. Now we will go more in detail about the React bindings. That means how to work with third-party APIs, how to work with third-party forms, how to use routing techniques for navigation. All these one by one we will see. This looks very lengthy for form handling. We will see the simplest methods for handling the forms, right? That we'll see in next session. Tomorrow we will see how to design APIs and work with APIs using class components. Okay, tomorrow we'll continue then, right? Yeah.